Already struggling to recruit new applicants in 2019, police departments saw a spike of retirements and a drop off in new recruits after the 2020 murder of George Floyd and subsequent backlash against the police, said Chuck Wexler, the executive director of the Police Executive Research Forum. In Philadelphia alone, police staffing levels dropped nearly 10% from the end of 2019 to the end of 22. Nationally, the number of sworn officers dropped 7% between 2019 and 2021, according to the FBI data. The Los Angeles Police Department is not meeting its staffing goals, but its neighbor, Beverly Hills, California, has hired two security firms whose employees patrol the city in cars or on foot as an extension of the police, says Todd Johnson, CEO of the Beverly Hills Chamber of Commerce. We want to make sure that the luxury capital of the world is also one of the safest places, Johnson says. This is perfectly in line with what I saw in law enforcement over that time, where we had senior people who just got fed up and said, hey, it's time for me to move on. I'm done. I'm retiring. Extremely hard to attract new recruits. Who wants to go in policing when the occupation is being eviscerated on the evening news every month? And what happens? We can't hire, we can't retain, we can't meet staffing goals. That's when privatization comes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And why is that? When you defund the police, you're not defunding all the police. You're really having a disproportionate impact on underserved communities because they do not have the money that you just, there was just an example in this Yahoo story. LAPD can't really put the number of officers on the street. Beverly Hills was able to go out and contract security people to make up the difference. So it's a fascinating thing that's growing tremendously these days. And part of it is because we've defunded the police, and people in wealthier communities are saying that's not the solution. We are going to actually give private funding to the departments to keep our level of police services up. Is that what's going on in this country right now?
Yeah,
Pay for policing?
the irony with the defund the police movement, you referenced Todd Johnson, who's the president of the Beverly Hills Chamber of Commerce. Todd and I have been very good friends for over 15 years. And I happened to talk to Todd, had no idea that you were going to quote him in that article, but I talked to Todd a few days ago about Beverly Hills PD staffing. We ended up on this topic, and the actual police department is near max staffing levels now. And one of the reasons is because they pay as well as anybody in the state of California, and they can actually recruit people to come in there. In other words, the financial incentives are so large there in Beverly Hills, they can do it. But on top of that, like you said, they have also integrated the private security forces into that city. I was all over Los Angeles County to the George Floyd riots as a chief, and Beverly Hills was getting hit hard during that summer of 2020. They were looking for resources to supplement who they had. It's not a very large law enforcement number of personnel there in their city. So they sought out private companies. They were contracting with other small agencies from around Southern California to supplement their police department. So, in fact, the Highway Patrol, we went in for a little bit and on our own dime. We didn't charge anything for it to help them out for a day or two. This goes right to what you're talking about, Bill, about the underserved communities. The communities who could afford the least to have their departments depleted through defunding are the ones that got defunded the worst and are suffering the most. Here's the irony I talked about being so thick. And reading articles, learning this over the last year since George Floyd, so many of the groups, the advocacy groups, the spokespeople for this faction or that faction, and as far as I'm concerned, the cop haters, supported defunding, resulting in higher crimes in those underserved communities, are also outspoken about the implementation of so-called private cops.
Yep.
And this is the irony. They're setting the fire, they're pouring gasoline on the fire, and then their complaining is no one comes to put it out. It's almost too stomach, and we can get into the details of private policing and what it means today. But the communities who can least afford a reduction in law enforcement personnel are the ones getting hit the hardest with this movement against privatizing law enforcement. Now, I want to say this from the outset, at the outset, that I am not a fan of quote unquote privatized policing. That's a
Mhm.
general statement. We can get into the details about what works and what doesn't. But generally speaking, I'm a big supporter of traditional government sponsored law enforcement.
Mark, you mentioned there something that I got to follow up on. It was how the people who were calling for defund the police are now the most critical of the privatized policing thing. Fair to say Chicago is one of the most violent cities in the country right now?
I'd say so.
Definitely top 10. I don't know if it's top three, top five, maybe not, but definitely officers may work off duty patrolling neighborhoods for private security companies, but they generally do not wear their police uniforms or represent themselves as police officers. The growing presence of off duty officers in upscale Chicago neighborhoods has drawn concern. Article from Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
Beetlejuice,
Yeah,
Beetlejuice.
who said she didn't want a quote circle where public safety is only available to the wealthy. That's a terrible dynamic. As you just said, who created this dynamic? That like the people that have the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal, their neighborhoods, they're going to exercise that financial wherewithal. October 26, 2020, Chicago mayor proposed an $80 million cut to the police budget and cut 400 officer spots. That was what she was in favor of. So you tell me cutting police services and then complain that some people in the community have taken it upon themselves to find these services from elsewhere or to contract privately for these services.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you exactly how you can do it. It's when you're purely ideological, when you come out as a cop hater, when you say that law enforcement is the problem, when you say that law enforcement is systemically racist, when you say that law enforcement is made up of a white supremacy hierarchy and legacy, you will do things as idiotic as calling for the defunding of police. And then again, when the crap hits the fan, then you want to correct the problem by going back to the equity card, where every outcome is the same for everybody, no matter what their behavior is. Wait a minute. If the more affluent communities or neighborhoods or individuals now can pay for private policing, private security, when you, the government, have taken away the general law enforcement, now you're going to call us, this community, the bad people. This is unfair. It's not equitable. This is insanity. This is how you do it when you don't use common sense. You are not an objective thinker. And when you don't believe in the rule of law, you only believe in outcome based policies. This is exactly how it happens. By the way, moving forward, we thought that when Lori Lightfoot left, things would maybe see a curve up. But the dingling who replaced her looked like George Washington. Oriole.
The other thing, Mark, aside from the financial support, like we talked about Beverly Hills being staffed full of officers, almost at 100% staffing, they have the ability to pay a little more. But also don't forget the community supports law enforcement. And in some communities, that makes it easier to recruit or easier to find officers who want to work in those communities.